In this episode of INN CEO Talks, we're on site at the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference, and I'm joined by Stephen Turner of Pivotal Metals, metals that are critically required for the increasingly technology-driven world economy. Stephen, welcome.
Thank you.
It's an interesting introduction, isn't it? Like, these are critical metals, and from your perspective, what are the ones that you're focused on here in Canada now?
So we have decided to really focus on the battery metals. It's a term that's used a lot in the market these days, but specifically for us, we're looking at nickel, copper, and we're looking at the platinum group elements. Those that we think are going to be very important, particularly as you move towards green hydrogen. So these are all metals that are important in electric vehicles. They're important in all the various changes to sustainable, technologically driven economies.
Well, we can't get there without these. And when you take a look at the landscape of where we are at known supply, we need to really unearth much greater supplies than we are even aware of.
Absolutely, and we're a big believer in these metals. We approached it very much at a supply risk perspective. Okay, so what we see is there's a great demand for these metals in the world economies, particularly in the modern world economies where they're trying to transition, but there is a fundamental gap in the supply, and that supply creates large risks that need to be mitigated, and there's no better mitigant than actually developing domestic resources.
What is it about Canada that you like? Because you're not a natural-born Canadian company. You've turned to Canada and said, that's where we want to be, and in particular, Quebec.
Yeah, so we've been very fortunate. We came across a very exciting exploration project in Quebec a couple of years ago that we picked up. And we picked it up just on the merits of the individual characteristics of this deposit. But as we've looked at it and we've understood more about Quebec, we've got very, very comfortable with the jurisdiction. We've seen what they're doing in Canada in terms of supporting critical metals development. Last year, they did a $3.8 billion budget to support the development of critical metals. And we can see that they're putting their money where their mouth is. We're seeing that in terms of support legislation. They have also, and this is very important to us, is the flow-through share scheme, which allows us to access potentially some very tax-efficient capital that we can deploy in the ground. And that's something we're going to be targeting in the near term.
So there's a couple other elements about Quebec. One is a mining jurisdiction. It has great credibility, but it also has extraordinary infrastructure as well. How important is that to you?
Extremely important. When we look at projects, we have a number of criteria. We look at obviously the resource. You can't have a project without a decent resource. But we also have to look at a lot of the aspects around that project. Where it's located, what the jurisdiction is from a legal and governance perspective, regulatory environment. But also, we need to look at infrastructure. I mean, some of these extremely remote projects will never get developed, or the capital costs associated with them are enormous. We recently acquired the Horden Lake project. That was a project that was remote when it was discovered in the 1960s, and it never progressed. Okay. Since then, it's had the James Bay Highway put in place, which links up the La Grande power station down to Matagami, and that passes within 18 kilometers of the project. And in fact, it just was recently upgraded. So back about a year ago, they finished a $300 million upgrade. It's got fiber optic cables. It's got, very importantly, it's got high voltage power lines coming from the power station, which gives us the opportunity to source green energy. So we have the potential here to develop a project that really is carbon neutral. So it ticks a lot of boxes from that respect. It also has access, because of the road system, it now has access to smelters that are in trucking distance, et cetera.
So when you say develop the project, what exactly are your intentions? Because, when we take a look at the ecosystem of juniors through to majors, some juniors say, yeah, we want to develop this on our own because it looks so promising, whereas others say, it looks so promising that it's beyond our scope. Which one of those paths are you leaning towards at this point?
We set ourselves up as a development company. Okay, so my background is very much around development, and that's how I see the company going forward. So we come in very much with the mindset of taking this Horden Lake deposit and developing it and taking it as far as we can. Now, obviously, in doing so, we continue to create value, and it may be at some point that we become very attractive to somebody else. That's always an exit option. Okay, but that's my philosophy is you don't you don't dress something up with superficial activities to try to sell it off. I actually think the best way to position yourself and make yourself attractive is to actually drive forward the project and put it into a very firm footing. And that's exactly what we're going to look to do with Horden Lake.
How do you describe where you're at on the project right now?
So Horden Lake we acquired at the end of last year. We picked up an enormous amount of data around that. So there's been about 52,000 meters of drilling. Started off with Inco in the 1960s, and then Southampton, a company in 2008, did an 18,000 meter drill program, and then there's some more recent drilling in 2012. Okay, so we have all the data for that. We have the assays, particularly the latter assays, which were very good because they did multi-element assays. The Inco one's really focused just on nickel and copper. But we have that information. We also managed to find and pick up an initial scoping review on the metallurgical test work from the 2012 drilling. So that's all at our disposal. So what we're looking to do now is fill in the gaps. This next year, we have looked at a drill program that's going to target some of those areas of the deposit that we don't have the data points of the silver, the gold, the cobalt, etc. So we can then update the mineral resource estimate and bring in all these credits. We know we've got very, very good grades of these precious metals. We've got 20 to 40 grams of gold, of silver per ton in the various intercepts we've seen. We've got 200 to 500 ppms of cobalt. Our gold in our resource estimate, we have about 66,000 ounces of gold in there, but that only covers about 40% of the deposit. So if you were to gross that up, that's 166,000 ounces of gold alone in our deposit. So there's a lot of value still to be generated just off the existing deposit that we have. We can also go in and do a bit of deeper drilling, target some high-grade areas that we know, so we hope to add some additional tonnage on that front. And then after that, really what we're doing is focusing on the process flow sheet. We're going to be taking some core, doing some more extensive metallurgical test work, basing it off the initial test work that's been done, so that's already saved us time and money. So what we're hoping is that at the end of all this program, we'll be able to produce a pre-feasibility study.
How are you for funding as you move forward? Investors will be looking at, are you going to go back to raise more money, or are you pretty solid and you're not going to have to dilute your position?
Yeah, so we have a very active program coming up, all right, and the result of that is we just completed the acquisition of Horden Lake. We raised funds for that in a very difficult market at the end of last year, and that allowed us to complete the acquisition. So we do have some funds in the bank, so we raised more than we needed to complete the acquisition, but it's not sufficient to take us through the entire PFS program, okay? And that's deliberate because in our opinion, we're much better off tackling or looking to raise capital through the flow-through share scheme, okay? Because that is money that we get an uplift. So for every dollar raised, particularly in Quebec, and this is another attraction in Quebec, it's got the highest uplift of any province in Canada. It's about 2 to 1. So for every dollar we raise, we can put about 2 in the ground. That's a lot more capital efficient for us to do than raising normal equity on the Australia Stock Exchange. So we have raised sufficient at the end of last year to complete the acquisition. Now we're going to be looking to raise some money through the flow-through share scheme in Canada to put that money in the ground.
A really good time for investors to be looking at your company.
Yes.
What, from a news flow perspective, should they be looking for in the next quarter or two?
Okay, so we have a program that's now set out for this pre-feasibility study. We've done a detailed review of that resource model that we completed back in November. And so we've put together about a 7,200, 7,300 drill program that will fill in the various gaps that we need for that pre-feasibility study. We also have a very exciting exploration project to the southwest in the Belleterre-Anglaire Greenstone Belt, and that's got very high grades, shallow, high grades of nickel, copper of over 5%, and also over 3 grams per ton of PGMs. So that looks really promising, and our work has indicated that we think there's a deeper feeder system. The entire area, 157 square kilometers, has had VTEM flown over it, and we're looking to reprocess that. We're looking to do some additional surveys, MT surveys, low frequency and acoustic MT surveys. These are surveys specifically designed to get a better, cleaner image of deeper anomalies, okay? We've seen 137 anomalies already identified at depth, 20 of them high priority. So this is a very exciting area as well. So we're not only going to be progressing Horden Lake, we're also going to be getting some good news flow, we expect, out of this Belleterre-Anglaire project. So there's a lot of activity. There's the drilling, there's the metallurgical test work, there's the the work and advancement of the Belletar-Anglaire project, all happening over the next 12 months.
Well, and we haven't had a chance really to talk about why these metals are so vitally critical, especially in North America and particularly in the United States, coupled with the Biden administration's focus on sourcing North American, because Quebec basically is American. It's a pretty exciting space to be in.
Absolutely. We are extremely excited about this. We think it's the right commodity, and we think it's the right jurisdiction. So we're telling the world, the market out there, that look, we're in a tier 1 mining jurisdiction. We're in the right metals, good depth, and very, very bullish outlook for these metals.
I'm going to wish you great success, but I'm also going to ask, will you please come back and give us updates in the coming quarters?
Most certainly.
Wonderful. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Yeah.